They handcuffed her in broad daylight, accusing her of a crime she didn't commit. But in court, the young black woman revealed herself as a state attorney, exposing the police's corruption. What happened next shocked everyone. Let's start from the beginning. The courtroom hummed with a low, expectant energy as the trial of Naomi Harris began to unfold. All eyes were on the poised young black woman seated at the defense table. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer, her posture was as impeccable as her appearance. Calm, collected, and resolute. Her sharp brown eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of the jury, the judge, and even the prosecution, with a quiet confidence that suggested she was already calculating her next move. Naomi, a professional in her early 30s, had been thrust into the spotlight under dire circumstances. She was accused of being an accomplice to a robbery at a high-end jewelry store, an accusation rooted more in conjecture than in fact. Arrested near the crime scene during her routine evening walk, Naomi had been swept up in a police raid, a victim of circumstances she couldn't have foreseen. There was no physical evidence linking her to the heist, no fingerprints, no stolen goods in her possession. But the police chief, a man notorious for his prejudiced policies and ruthless pursuit of convictions, had insisted on her guilt. The prosecution was relentless, portraying Naomi as a manipulative opportunist. They argued that she had used her intelligence and charm to orchestrate the robbery, hiding her involvement behind her polished exterior. They even leaned into implicit biases, framing her as someone who might use her race and gender to garner sympathy and evade responsibility. Naomi's court-appointed attorney, visibly overwhelmed, struggled to mount a defense. He fumbled through his notes, missing critical opportunities to challenge the prosecution's narrative. Objections were rare and poorly articulated, and his cross-examinations failed to discredit the shaky testimonies of the prosecution's witnesses. The jury's expressions ranged from confusion to doubt, their skepticism silently mounting. As the prosecution rested its case, an uneasy silence settled over the courtroom. Naomi sat unflinching, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. To some, it appeared as if the scales of justice were tipping against her. But to Naomi, the trial was just beginning. The trial continued with the prosecution calling their star witness, a police officer involved in Naomi Harris's arrest. Dressed in a crisp uniform, he stood with a practiced air of authority, but his testimony left much to be desired. His account of the events was riddled with vague claims, unsupported by hard evidence. He recounted seeing Naomi behaving suspiciously near the jewelry store, but provided no specifics about her alleged involvement in the crime. His words seemed carefully crafted to imply guilt without providing a single concrete fact to support it. Naomi, seated at the defense table, remained impassive. Her calm, composed demeanor was striking, even unnerving, in a room charged with tension. The judge, a middle-aged man who had so far maintained a neutral expression, occasionally cast pointed glances her way, as though trying to gauge her unshakable confidence. The jury shifted in their seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and doubt. Then came the moment that shifted the tide of the trial. Naomi stood and requested to testify. The courtroom fell silent as she made her way to the stand, her every movement deliberate and poised. Sworn in, she turned to the judge, her voice clear and commanding, carrying through the hushed room. "Your Honor," she began, her gaze steady, "this trial is not about justice. It's about appearances. It's about protecting a system that too often prioritizes optics over truth." Her words struck like lightning. Naomi proceeded to meticulously dissect the prosecution's case, pointing out glaring inconsistencies in their timeline and evidence. She revealed details about the investigation that exposed its biased nature, including the police department's documented history of disproportionately targeting people of color in similar cases. Gasps rippled through the gallery as she spoke. Naomi's articulation was surgical, her arguments backed by logic and facts. The jury sat riveted, while the judge leaned forward, his impartial facade faltering under the weight of her words. As the court recessed, murmurs filled the room. People whispered questions to each other. Who was this woman? How could someone accused of a crime command the courtroom with such authority? Naomi's testimony had left an indelible mark, and everyone knew the trial had just taken a dramatic turn. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the final day of Naomi Harris's trial began. All eyes were on her as she rose to her feet, her presence commanding the room. "Your Honor," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "I would like to invoke my right to legal self-representation." The gallery erupted in murmurs, and the judge raised his gavel to call for order. Naomi's public defender, who had appeared out of his depth throughout the trial, let out a visible sigh of relief and stepped aside, leaving Naomi to take control. What happened next shocked everyone. Standing tall and composed, Naomi faced the judge and the jury. "I am not merely a defendant in this case," she declared, her words echoing in the silent courtroom. "I am the state's attorney, conducting an undercover investigation into systemic corruption within the police department." A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the weight of her revelation settled. Even the judge, who had maintained a stoic demeanor throughout the trial, seemed momentarily taken aback. Naomi began to lay out her case with precision and authority. She presented damning evidence she had gathered over months of investigation. Secret recordings of the police chief making racist remarks, detailed logs showing manipulated evidence, and internal memos that exposed a deliberate strategy to target minorities to inflate arrest and conviction statistics. With every piece of evidence revealed, the gallery's whispers grew louder, the shock and indignation unmistakable. "This case," Naomi continued, her voice unwavering, "is not about a robbery. It is about power, prejudice, and a systemic abuse of authority." Her piercing gaze swept across the courtroom, daring anyone to refute her words. "I was targeted not because of what I did, but because of what I represent. A black woman who refuses to bow to a corrupt system." The courtroom was electrified. Jurors leaned forward, captivated. The prosecution sat frozen, their strategy unraveled. The police chief, seated in the gallery, looked visibly shaken as the evidence against him mounted. Naomi's unmasking left no doubt. This was no ordinary trial, and she was no ordinary defendant. She had turned the courtroom into a battleground for justice, and she was winning. The courtroom was chaos as Naomi Harris's explosive revelations shattered the case against her. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, blending into an uproar that the judge struggled to contain. His gavel struck repeatedly, his voice strained as he ordered a recess to regain control. Behind the bench, his normally calm expression had cracked, revealing the weight of the revelations that had upended the trial. At the prosecution's table, the team frantically shuffled through their papers, their earlier confidence now replaced with panic. They had been thoroughly outmaneuvered, their narrative dismantled by Naomi's precise and damning presentation of evidence. Across the room, the police chief, whose testimony had bolstered the prosecution's case, sat stiff and pale in the gallery. Each word Naomi had spoken replayed in his mind like a hammer blow, laying bare his role as the architect of systemic corruption. When court resumed, the tension was almost suffocating. All eyes were on the judge, who took a deep breath before addressing the room. "In light of the evidence presented," he said, his voice solemn, "I have no choice but to dismiss all charges against Ms. Harris." He paused, glancing briefly at Naomi, whose steady gaze remained locked on him. "Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into the police department regarding allegations of misconduct and systemic bias." The room erupted again, this time in cheers. Naomi stood, her calm demeanor unbroken, as she gathered her documents and exited the courtroom to a standing ovation. The gallery erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the halls. Her dignity, intelligence, and courage had not only saved her life, but had also ignited a broader fight for justice. In the days that followed, Naomi's story became a national sensation. Media outlets reported on her bravery, sparking protests and calls for change across the country. The police chief resigned in disgrace, facing charges for his role in orchestrating the scandal. Naomi's actions inspired legislative reforms and a renewed focus on law enforcement accountability. Her name became synonymous with resilience and justice, a testament to the power of truth in dismantling even the most entrenched systems of oppression.